interesting enough, I actually asked my OBGYN after I had my daughter. I said, I remember because I ran a 10K about 4 months postpartum, thinking my body would be ready for something like that because I did exercise throughout my entire pregnancy. But turns out, no, my body was not ready for something
No,
like
usually
that.
not. No.
And so I peed my pants the entire race.
Mhm.
I ended the race. And then the next week I went to visit my OB and I said, listen, what am I supposed to do about this? And she said, it's just going to get better with time. And so, of course, I'm doing my research online. And yeah, stories did say there's some stories that I found said that it does get better. But I knew, like, okay, this isn't just going to get better on its own. There is something that I'm going to have to do. Welcome to another episode of the Beyond the Scale podcast. I am so excited about our guest today. We have Kathleen Kilburg, who is the Bladder coach. And Kathleen helps women get out of the bathroom and back to their life. And Kathleen is a pelvic floor therapist, and she helps women virtually through her Bladder Coach Academy and then also in her clinic. Kathleen is an expert in her field, and it is a topic that I am very passionate about because I experienced pelvic floor issues after having my daughter, Sophia, 4.5 years ago. And I actually went to a pelvic floor therapist for several months. And through my pelvic floor therapy, I was able to heal my pelvic floor and start running again and doing the jumping that I enjoy doing in the studio. And then also it helped with my second pregnancy with my son. My pelvic floor issues were fixed because of the therapy, and it helped with the pregnancy of my son. So I'm so excited to be chatting with Kathleen today, and I know that you're going to get an incredible amount of value from this episode. Kathleen, thank you so much for joining us today on Beyond the Scale. For our listeners listening with us today, we have Kathleen. She is a pelvic floor therapist, and she helps women get out of the bathroom and get back to their life. So welcome, Kathleen.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, I'm so excited to talk to you because pelvic floor therapy is something that I actually took advantage of after I had my daughter 4 years ago. And it was one of those things that was first scary and awkward. And then second, like I didn't know anything about it. I really didn't even know this kind of therapy existed. My husband is a physical therapist assistant, so he's the one that introduced it to me. But at first I was like, ugh, pelvic floor therapy. That does not sound fun, but it was something that I needed. So how did you even get into this field?
It just sort of happened, actually. So I started as a regular orthopedic physical therapist, working mostly with back pain, hip pain, things like that. And I started taking some of those pelvic floor courses to just treat those patients better. And it kind of saw how much of a need there was and how there were so few pelvic floor PTs at that time that I started to dive into it a little bit more. And then after I had my first child and saw how little there was at that 6-week checkup, I just went all in, and it just became my soapbox mission to educate women everywhere that this was something that was available to them and that they could actually heal their pelvic floor after having babies, and ways to protect it too.
Yeah. And interesting enough, I actually asked my OBGYN after I had my daughter. I said, I remember because I ran a 10K about 4 months postpartum, thinking my body would be ready for something like that because I did exercise throughout my entire pregnancy. But turns out, no, my body was not ready for something
No,
like
usually
that.
not, no.
And so I peed my pants the entire race. I ended the race. And then the next week I went to visit my OB and I said, listen, what am I supposed to do about this? And she said, it's just going to get better with time. And so, of course, I'm doing my research online and yeah, stories did say there's some stories that I found said that it does get better. but I knew like, okay, this isn't just going to get better on its own. There is something that I'm going to have to do. And she actually recommended back when I had this conversation with her, like this, it was called a Kegel exerciser.
Yep. Yep.
I'm sure you've,
Yep.
and awkward too. That was yeah. Do you recommend those to people?
I do not.
You don't? Okay.
No. You know, honestly, so little of what I do are Kegels. It's just such a small part of it that, you know, you really just need to know how to contract the pelvic floor. You don't need to be doing Kegels all day long.
Right.
So I have some of those Kegel exercisers with the little thing that moves up, but no, I really don't ever use them with anybody.
Yeah, it's not a comfortable thing. It's not fun.
No, it is not. And there's a lot of apps now that are kind of the same thing. You can see that you're contracting around this device, but again, you don't need to do Kegels all day long. Once you know how to contract that muscle, then we move on to doing it functionally.
Yeah. So does every woman after like a baby feel like they need this? Like explain that to me, because there's clearly people that we work with at Fit Body Bootcamp in the studio that they don't have any issues after having children. But then you have someone like me who I exercised my entire pregnancy. I exercised my entire pregnancy with my second child as well, but I still do have the pelvic floor issues. Does every woman have this issue?
Yeah, not everybody does, you know. So some people are, let's say they're lucky. You know, they maybe were like you and they worked out the whole time and they were super fit and their core was really strong and they had a pretty easy labor. They didn't tear, they didn't have an episiotomy, so they may not have any issues. Somebody who was just like that, who did all that strength work and still had a relatively easy delivery, may have some dysfunction. So there's really no cookie cutter way to know who needs some pelvic floor work and who doesn't. It's more just letting women know that it's a possibility and to kind of pay attention to your own body.
What are some signs that like women will start to notice? What are some things that they'll start to notice that is pointing them in the direction like, hey, you should probably get this checked out. You may need pelvic floor therapy. So
the biggest one that we see is leaking urine with cough, sneeze, laugh while running, exercise. That's a big one that, really kind of affects your quality of life and your confidence throughout the day. So that's what brings a lot of women in to see me. You could also have pelvic pain while you're sitting. Pain with intercourse is a huge one after a vaginal delivery if you had any sort of tearing. Back pain, hip pain, tailbone pain certainly can come up afterwards. And then if you ended up with a C-section, abdominal pain can actually be a big complaint that we see a lot of people with because of that scar.
Yeah. That's interesting because you always think, or at least for me, someone who has a C-section, they're kind of in the clear when it comes to any pelvic issues, but that's not necessarily the case.
You can get pelvic floor dysfunction just from the weight of the pregnancy.
Yeah.
So even if you didn't deliver vaginally at all, you still may have dysfunction because you carried around this human for 9 months, and that's a lot of pressure on your pelvis.
Right. Oh, definitely. Yeah. So I want you to walk our listeners through you think you have a pelvic floor issue. You feel like you need to go see someone, or say they contact you. What is the next step? What sort of treatment is available, and what sort of treatment should our listeners be looking for that really is the most effective?
Yeah. So if they contact me through the Bladder coach, I will go through kind of what their symptoms are. You know, what kind of issues are they having? I'll ask a couple probing questions to kind of get a little bit deeper. And that can kind of help me decide if they are somebody that we could work with virtually, or if they really need some hands-on therapy. And if we can work virtually, then we meet with you once a week, going through, whatever kind of behavior modifications we might be working on, your exercises, how well those are going, and how that's relating to your symptoms. If it seems like you need some hands-on stuff, then I work with them to find a pelvic floor physical therapist near them that they can get in to see and get that hands-on work.
Okay. Well, that's great. That's awesome that you have those two options.
Yes.
And again, I feel like it's kind of a scary, uncomfortable topic. So to
Yes.
have somebody that you can go to virtually before you take that next step and go see somebody in an office,
Yeah.
I do think that would have made me feel more comfortable.
Right.
So
that's part of why I started the Bladder Coach. Is I get so many women in the clinic who had been referred to pelvic floor PT years ago and didn't want to because they were uncomfortable with that internal assessment aspect.
Yeah.
So the virtual is a great way for people who are a little uncomfortable with that or who don't have time for it, either because they have all these babies at home
Right.
or they're working full time or whatever it is. They don't have time to go for an hour PT session. So
Right.
it's a great option for women to have more access to pelvic floor PT. Because to be honest, there's not enough of us around the country.
Oh, no,
There's
not at all.
Huge long wait list. In my clinic, I have a 3-month wait list for patients to come in to see me. And that's not uncommon because there's just not enough of us. So it's a way to increase the access for women all over to be able to have a pelvic floor PT that you can talk to.
Man. And why is it that the things that we need to be doing the most is the hardest to find time for? I actually remember when I was going through pelvic floor therapy, she asked me to make a journal each day of how, like when I was drinking my water, what I was drinking. For me, coffee was a huge trigger in the morning. So I would drink way too much coffee when I first would wake up. And then I would go to Fit Body Boot Camp actually for a 9:30 session every day. And then at that session, it was like, I'm running to the bathroom.
All that coffee's got to come out.
Yeah. And so we were pinpointing that like coffee was like aggravating my bladder a little bit, but just taking the time to do this log for her. And then the homework that she would give me, I'm like, gosh, this is too much. I don't have time for this. At the same time, it's what's most important. Like I need to make that time. So it's like
you have to take care of you before you can take care of everyone else.
Right. It's a double-edged sword for sure.
Yes. Yeah. And again, that's part of the reason I started the coaching.
Yeah.
Is our coaching calls are 10 or 15 minutes. So it's easier to find that time to take care of yourself.
Yeah. Well, I want to go one step deeper with that just so that, because I know this episode is going to evoke so many questions from our listeners, and they're probably first going to wonder, well, what is her coaching like if I do it at home? Like, what am I going to be doing at home? Do you feel comfortable offering up some of the things that you would be doing with one of your clients at home?
Yeah, so we meet like this. I meet with my clients via Zoom.
Okay.
We talk about, maybe what your bladder diary was, how much water you've been drinking, how often you're going. Sometimes I will put women on a voiding schedule. So I'll say, every 2 hours you have to go to the bathroom, and that will train your bladder when it's allowed to contract. So we go through, how did you do with your voiding schedule? There's different urge suppression techniques, so that if you're somebody who gets that super strong urge and you need to rush to the bathroom, we go through different techniques to calm that urge so you don't have to rush. And then I have a set of exercises. And again, my goal is that, I'm working with new moms who are super busy or you're working. And so the goal is that the exercises are 5 to 10 minutes. So I give a short set of, 5 to 10 minutes of exercises. We go through how well those went, and then we maybe advance them up to the next set. And that's generally how all of our sessions go. There's no, you don't have to do any sort of exam during the coaching calls. You're not checking anything on yourself. You're not showing me anything. We're just talking and we're working together on the plan that fits into your life.
That's awesome. Now, what about, fitting, plans in our life? A lot of moms, they want to start working out again, but their body isn't quite ready for it. Yes. Or how do you, as a therapist, determine when somebody is ready to start running again or jumping again? Or what are some exercises that we should be modifying or avoiding altogether if you are having any pelvic floor issues?
Yeah, so sit-ups are one of the biggest culprits. So, most women are super happy when I say, don't ever do a sit up again.
Yeah.
There's so many other ways to work your core that are better and safer for your pelvic floor than sit ups. So,
like what?
Bridges, planks. Planks are amazing. Some pelvic floor PTs don't like squats, but I love them. So I teach women how to activate and how to breathe and do them correctly. So if you think about what you're doing in your daytime, you're squatting all day long.
Right.
So to just avoid that because it's a dangerous exercise puts you at risk all day. So we do lots of squats, tons of bridges. Bridges are great for your whole core and will help to kick in the pelvic floor as you do them. So we do tons of those exercises. So the only thing that I really do eliminate are crunches and sit-ups. Everything else is fair game as long as you can activate your muscles correctly.
Yeah. And correct me if I'm wrong, but if you just have a baby and you have some of the ab separation, the diastasis recti, that also correlates with your pelvic floor as well. So you have to make sure that we're thinking about all of those things together when we're reintroducing exercise.
Yep. So your core, you can think of it like a box. So the front of the box is your transverse abdominal that pulls that diastasis together. The back of your box is the multifidus muscle, which is a little tiny muscle that goes from one vertebrae to the next. The top of the box is your diaphragm, and the bottom is your pelvic floor. So all four of those have to work together. If you have one that's working more than the rest of them, that creates dysfunction. So we work on getting all four of those working together. And then once they're working together and you know how to activate them properly, you can do anything.
So you don't want the bottom of the box to fall out.
Exactly. Yes. And you don't want the front of the box separated.
Right. Wow. That's
the diastasis is a huge problem that many, many women have. And there are a lot of studies that if it's a mild diastasis, that it does come together on its own. But once you get past that mild diastasis, you really do need some focused exercises to help pull it back together.
So is there a point with that you reach where you've done too much damage and it's impossible to...
There is, yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes, there is. Sometimes it does need to be surgically corrected. If it's torn all the way down through into the intestines, or if it's a certain width and it's not closing down, then some women do need surgical correction for that.
Wow. Even more reason to exercise after having children.
Yes. And during. Yes. Keep those muscles strong and active.
Right. Now, say for someone who's pregnant with their second child, is there any pelvic floor exercises that they should be doing during their pregnancy to help their pelvic floor?
So generally, we don't do a lot of pelvic floor strengthening during pregnancy. Especially if you're going to be vaginally delivering. Now, if you're delivering via C-section, we might work a little bit more on strengthening. But if you're delivering vaginally, as you progress in your pregnancy, we want to work on that pelvic floor opening and lengthening so that it can stretch to allow a baby to come out. If you're pregnant and you're doing Kegels all day long, that muscle is getting really, really, really tight and it's not going to be able to stretch and open. Okay. So we work on strengthening the rest of the core while you're pregnant so that your pelvic floor can relax and open up.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, with my daughter, with my first, this episode might be TMI for some people. Oh, well, you're used to it, right?
There is no TMI in pelvic floor therapy. It's all fair game.
Definitely not. So with my daughter, again, I exercised throughout my entire pregnancy, but I think what hurt me with my pelvic floor is she got stuck in the birth canal. And so they did end up having to do the episiotomy and they tried even the suction thing. That was not fun. And so she was stuck in there for so long that I think my pelvic floor was like, okay, we've had enough. And so nothing could stay up there for the longest time. But after my second child, it was so much better. And I don't know if it was because I just worked on the pelvic floor therapy for so long after having Sophia that it was strengthened more. And I wasn't doing a lot of jumping, so I did avoid that. I don't know if that matters at all, but I didn't do a lot of jumping. I did a lot more walking in my second pregnancy than I did running. I was trying to avoid high impact because I didn't want that to happen again.
Right. So some of it is, the birth canal and the ligaments are a little bit stretched already. So subsequent deliveries are slightly easier. But when you went through pelvic floor therapy, you healed those muscles and they learned how to contract and how to relax.
Right.
Which you probably didn't do as well with your first delivery. So you were able to relax those muscles, let them open up so the baby could drop down and come out much easier.
Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy.
It's all about the coordination of everything.
Right.
It's not just get stronger, 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 stronger. You have to be able to move too.
Right. Yeah. And how do you feel about, I remember my OB, this was another suggestion of hers. There are it's like a bladder insert that you can use if you're like running or doing like a high impact exercise. What are your feelings around those? Yeah.
So pessaries have a great place. So a pessary is if you have a prolapse. So your bladder or your uterus, something is dropping down.
Right.
And so when you're up on your feet or when you're running, you feel that dropping and that pressure more. So the pessary holds it up in place, basically acting like your ligaments and your muscles should do. So they definitely serve a function.
Okay.
If you have a significant prolapse where the organs are either coming all the way to the vaginal opening or they're actually coming out the vaginal opening, a pessary may not be as helpful. But if you have a mild prolapse, using a pessary while you're strengthening your core is a great assistance.
Can you fix a prolapsed bladder with pelvic floor therapy? Is that two different things?
Yeah, yes and no. So sometimes you can. So generally we say you can improve by 1 grade of prolapse with therapy. You're not going to go back to where you were prior to ever being pregnant. There'll probably always be some movement of that bladder. But if your muscles are strong and you're coordinated with all your other core, you're not going to be pushing down onto that bladder. So it's not going to be descending as much. Okay. So that really alleviates the symptoms that you have from the prolapse, even though you may have a little bit of dropping still.
Yeah. I don't know why, but just the term prolapsed bladder just sounds so scary.
It does. Yes, it sounds terrifying.
Yeah.
And to just know that your bladder can drop down that much is terrifying to women.
Right. Well, and all of this it's comical to think about because back before I had kids, I would think like if somebody, if they sneezed and they peed their pants, like only old people do that. Yes. No, it happens to anyone who has a child.
Absolutely. It is extremely common. I say that a lot to my younger patients who come in and they're so embarrassed about it and they hate having to talk about it. And I say, look, this is what I do all day long. You are not alone. Right. This is so very common.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. I think, and the more people talk about it, the more comfortable they feel. And ultimately that fixes some of the problems because they are going to know, okay, I'm not alone in this journey. Yeah. There are other people that are experiencing this, and there are doctors out there that are willing to help me with my problem.
Yes. Yeah, that is my goal, is to just get the word out there to women everywhere that it's not normal, you're not alone, and there's things you can do. Yeah.
Well, all of this is so awesome. All this information is very helpful for me and for our listeners. I know that I have clients in the studio that struggle with this, that they're modifying a jumping jack or they're avoiding jumping, which is fine to do. We don't all need to be doing box jumps. We don't need to be doing jump lunges. But at the end of the day, if you are leaking and if you're experiencing pain, you do need to find somebody that can help you, alleviate some of those symptoms.
Right. And if you're only leaking now with jumping or running and you don't do anything to address it, it usually will progress to leaking with coughing and sneezing or leaking when you stand up. It usually won't get better on its own from that
Yeah.
point. So the earlier you can fix it, the better your outcomes will be.
Yeah. Well, if somebody was interested in working with you, how could they do that? How can they find you?
Yeah, so they can reach me through the Bladder Coach. So it's that's the website is thebladdercoach.com. Facebook and Instagram are both the Bladder Coach. They can reach out to me on any of those avenues, and then we just talk first to see if it's something that would work for you and work for what your symptoms are. And then, as I said before, if it seems like you really need a pelvic floor PT, I have a whole network of qualified PTs throughout the country that I can help guide you towards.
That's awesome. And even if you don't have a relationship with a therapist in their area, do you have like something that, like a script or something that you could give that person? Like, hey, this is what you need to be asking for when you're looking
Yes,
for
absolutely.
a therapist?
Yep.
Okay. That's great.
Yeah, I've been doing this for so long, I kind of know, what to be asking somebody.
Right. Yeah, because when I started my pelvic floor journey, I actually went to 2 pelvic floor therapists. I tried out both to see which one I felt more comfortable with, and they both had a very different approach.
Mhm.
One was more like a manipulation sort of practice, and then the other one, she actually had me hook up to it wasn't a TENS unit. It was something.
Biofeedback.
Yes, the biofeedback.
Yep.
And that's what we did for our therapy. And she's the one that I ended up going with ultimately because I felt more comfortable with her. But I did find it interesting that they both had a very different approach.
Yeah. And, both can work great. You have to find what makes you feel comfortable.
Right. Well, awesome. Again, all this information is so great, Kathleen, and it's just applicable to what we talk about on the Beyond the Scale is, life beyond the scale, things that are actually happening in our life around health, around fitness, wellness that matter. And especially to all the mamas that are listening to this is a topic that we do need to talk about more to feel more comfortable and to be more educated about the subject. So I love to leave all of our listeners with this question for our guests, and that is, what does beyond the scale mean to you?
So to me, I would say it's your whole self, how confident you feel in your skin. So it's not just your weight or what exercises you do. It's how does your body feel in your skin, and being able to feel comfortable in your skin in whatever that looks like.
I love that, because confidence is the best thing that we can wear.
Yes, absolutely.
I love that. Well, Kathleen, thank you so much. For all of our listeners, check out Kathleen's website. And then also, do you have social media?
Yes. Yeah, we're on Instagram and Facebook as the Bladder Coach. Look us up there for tips and videos and different things to help gain a little control of your bladder.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Kathleen.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes.